Straighten your left leg on the ground and lift your right leg off of the ground. You're going to interlace your hands together right behind the hamstring, underneath the knee. From here, we're going to do clockwise rotations for 1 minute with your right ankle. As we rotate this foot, let's make sure the shin stays parallel to the ground and we're taking our time. You might notice that you're skipping certain angles and ranges of motion. So I want you to go slow. Whatever your natural speed is, go half as fast as that. And then go half as fast as whatever that half speed was. The goal is to rediscover function with dozens of muscles in your toes, arch, and front of your shin. So take your time for the minute of clockwise rotation that we're going to do. As the right foot's rotating, let's also make sure that that left leg is still pointed straight up towards the ceiling. That way we don't have any rotation starting to come in with this exercise. Most of the time people will use speed to avoid function. So again, really pay attention to how fast that ankle's moving. That was about a minute, so let's switch directions now. Let's go counterclockwise with the same ankle. It's also really important to understand if you have any TMJ or teeth grinding issues, what your jaw and tongue position is doing in this exercise. When the ankle, knee, and hip are not stable, we will actually clench down the jaw in an effort to stabilize our pelvis. So make sure to keep breathing, relax your face, relax your jaw, and just rediscover motion, 1 repetition and 1 circle at a time. Ideally, these should be simple, right? We're just asking muscles to move the bones in the foot. If these are hard for you, we have to ask the question of, well, what is really helping us walk? What's helping us run if these muscles aren't even able to move the foot well without being under load? The whole idea with this is we want this to get easier over time. Now, let's do point and flexes with the same ankle. So point the foot forward, then pull it back. Point it forwards and pull it back. This is that action that we want to have happen when we walk. It's that rolling toe-off action with each step. And you'll find that the easier this exercise gets, the smoother and more natural walking and running is going to feel for you. And that's good for the right leg. Let's switch sides. Now straighten your right leg out on the ground and lift your left leg up. Interlace your hands together behind your left hamstring. And we're going to start off with counterclockwise circles on this side for a minute. And even though it's early on this left side, you should probably already have a sense of how this foot is working different than the other foot. Ideally, we want them to be the same, but if there is years of imbalance, compensation, dysfunction, and asymmetry, chances are you're going to notice one side already has a different level of range of motion, one side has a different level of cadence and speed to it, and one side definitely has a different level of endurance. So pay attention to which one feels like it's fatiguing. Over time, you should start to notice both feet can be used the same way. So be sure to keep the straight leg still pointed up towards the ceiling. Good, about 10 more seconds of this rotation. The shoulders are relaxed and the jaw is relaxed. Now, let's go the opposite way. So let's go clockwise. And again, whatever speed you're choosing, go half as fast as that, and then half as fast as that. I don't care if you get 10 circles in throughout the entire duration. I just want that foot to start moving again. And also don't be afraid to get those toes involved too. So when you get that rolling action, get those toes by pointing and flexing and curling with you. The whole idea here is to rediscover function throughout the entire foot. Hence the name of the exercise. Good, nice and slow, we're breathing. And also make sure that the leg is straight. Notice how the shin is parallel and it's not moving around at all. You might try to move your ankle left, right, higher or lower to make it easier to work. We want to keep everything on really nice angles today. Perfect. Now let's go ahead and point and flex. Pull the toes back and point them forward. And again, don't be afraid to get those toes involved. Let's see those toes point and curl with you, and then pull back. Wonderful. 1 rep at a time. And just to be really redundant here, we're working on the strength and the function of the arches, the shins, and the calf muscles. These are the muscles that are responsible for stabilizing our upper body. So it's really important that we work on our foundation, the base of our support, to help us get us through the rest of the day. And that's good. You're going to take 2 equal-sized objects and place them in front of you overhead, just within arm's reach. And let's lay face down on the ground. Your legs, your big toes are going to touch, and your heels drop down to the side, so both legs gently internally rotate. And from here, we're going to place our hands overhead on our 2 solid objects. And when our hands are overhead, it's important to not have them closer than shoulder width. We want the hands about shoulder width apart. From here, we're going to just curl the tips of the fingers into the knuckles and point our thumbs straight up. And I want you to not do this delicately. I really want you to have an active open palm position. And once the palm is open, I want you to think about just gently externally rotating from the shoulders, just like that. We're going to stay here for a minute before we change upper body positions. When your fingers are curled like that, it's completely different than you making a fist. When you make a fist, you use the muscles on the inside of the forearm. When you keep your fist open and your fingers are curled, you use the muscles on the outside of your forearm, the top part of your forearm, which in today's world are probably one of the most undertrained muscles because we're always texting, we're always gripping things. We never really get to work on the opposing muscles of the arm. So by keeping the fingers curled, we get to work on the extensors of the forearm, which help us find the ability to externally rotate in both shoulders. If these extensor muscles on the forearm are weak, they could absolutely be the root cause of why your shoulder is unable to rotate or change positions. And it's kind of weird to think that a wrist weakness or a wrist imbalance is what's keeping your shoulders from changing positions. But that's what we're trying to change here. So now that we've spent a minute, we're going to basically stay in the same position, but move our arms to a Y position. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to move both blocks a little wider out to the side. And I want you to think about making a big capital Y position. And forehead on the ground. Good. Fingers are still curled. We're going to move this block up a little higher. Perfect. Friendly reminder to breathe. Let both shoulders work here. And keep the legs relaxed. It's a great way to work on overhead function, shoulder mobility, and shoulder stability without potentially getting the back involved or rotating the rib cage one way or the other. So this is us really trying to intentfully and purposefully work towards bilateral shoulder function, where both shoulders truly are doing the same work without excessively flaring the ribs forward or excessively arching the lower back or bracing the core. We're trying to get the shoulders to be shoulders again. Keep those thumbs pointed up towards the ceiling and shoulders rotated a little externally. Great. Now slide both objects out to the side so your arms are in a T position. So big capital letter T. Good. And same thing. Now, for your thumbs to be pointed straight up towards the ceiling here, if your palms are facing forward, what you're really asking the shoulder to do is externally rotate without anything else changing positions. So you should probably start to feel a pretty significant level of rotator cuff work. You should feel these shoulder blades gently come back together as well. So think of, if I was there, I would put a pencil right between your shoulder blades. Think of gently squeezing these shoulder blades back together, just like that. Now that the shoulder blade's in its backward position, you're really going to put some healthy demand on these shoulders and ask them to rotate with thoracic extension, which is what we want. Straighten both elbows. Keep those fingers curled. Take a couple breaths. We just hit a minute, but we're going to hold it a little bit longer because I think everybody needs some serious time in this position. Take a couple more deep breaths. Let these shoulders figure out how to work without compensation in their rightful place. And that's time. Great job. Now let's lie on your back and begin to move your pelvis. This exercise is about getting your pelvis to move around your hips, as opposed to a lot of other exercises that are about getting your hips to move within your pelvis. So really slowly, why don't you go ahead and place your hands on your pelvis. And what we're going to do from here is gently roll our pelvis forward. The lower back is going to gently arch. And then we're going to roll our pelvis backward, and the lower back is going to flatten. And we're doing this nice and slow. I don't care how high or low you can go. We're just looking at getting the pelvis to start rocking around a horizontal axis again. Now, if this is your first time doing this, or if you're really early on in restoring function, what you're probably going to notice is that your lower back is tipping your pelvis forward, and your abs are rolling your pelvis back. This is what happens when you lose function to your hips. Your core and your back have to hijack motion just for your pelvis to move. So what we want to do is we want to change this. When you roll your pelvis back, your glutes, your butt muscles should roll that pelvis back. When you roll that pelvis forward, your hip flexors should roll that pelvis forward. So a proper pelvic tilt is the glutes and then the hip flexors rocking that pelvis forward and backward. Yes, the abs are going to help a little bit to roll you back. Yes, the lower back is going to help you a little bit to roll you forward, but they aren't the primary drivers of the pelvis changing positions. It's the glutes and the hip flexors. Those are the primary muscles that should control and manipulate the position of your pelvis. So if you have a hard time even finding out what that feels like, and if these muscles are difficult to discover, that should probably explain why your pelvis is in the position it's in, because your abs and your lower back have now had to take on the full responsibility of moving your pelvis. Another great cue, so when the back is flat, think about if you were to just lift your feet off the ground, just an inch. Those are the hip flexor muscles that should roll your pelvis forward. So think about whatever muscles that would lift your legs off the ground. That's what should tip the pelvis forward, and your lower back should arch as a byproduct of the hip flexors working. Great, that's it. Start this exercise off by grabbing the side of your pelvis. What I want to make sure is that pelvis doesn't move around just for the sake of this exercise. The whole goal is to keep the pelvis level and neutral and in the same position while we rediscover hip function. So from here, holding onto your pelvis, let's lift your left leg off the ground and place it on top of the right thigh. And press that left knee away from you so you can feel that outer left hip start to work. And from here, lift the right leg off of the ground. We're going to hold this for a minute. As this right leg is off the ground, the ankle is going to be in line with the knee, and you're pulling the toes back towards you, just like this. And let's remember to relax those shoulders. We don't want to start curling and using our shoulders. The whole idea here is to teach the right hip flexor how to stabilize as the left hip is externally rotating. The goal is to not make this be so hard to where we need to bring our shoulders in to help. But notice if your shoulders are trying to help. This is such a simple way to see how when the hips stop functioning, how the shoulders have to chime in, or maybe we stop breathing, or maybe we really engage our core to do this. This is about the right hip and left hip being able to work together. You've got about 10 more seconds. It's going to be really important that this right leg that is elevated right now, the shin is parallel to the floor. So make sure that that foot's not trying to raise up higher or drop down. And that was about a minute. So now let's bring the right foot down to the ground and we're going to switch sides. Same thing, keep holding that pelvis. We want to make sure it doesn't move around at all. Press the right knee away from you. And now let's lift the left leg off the ground. And we're going to stay here for another minute. Again, friendly reminder to breathe and relax the upper body. Pay attention to if one side just innately feels stronger for you or if one hip feels tighter for you. This is just how imbalance and asymmetry have shown up within your hips. And this is a really great exercise because one hip is having to mobilize. In this example, her right hip is having to become mobile and rotate, and the left hip is having to become strong and stabilize. So this is a great way to bring balance back to your hip and pelvic function. And also, friendly reminder, once you make sure the shoulders are relaxed, this left leg, the shin should be parallel to the ground. Make sure that ankle isn't trying to move into any different position. You might find if the hip doesn't like to work here or has a hard time working here, this ankle is going to move to the left or to the right. That's you trying to rotate the hip just to stabilize it. This is why we want to keep everything in a really nice, aligned, neutral position. Great. Go ahead and bring your leg back down to the ground. Now, today we started off with one leg on top of the other. Tomorrow, you're going to switch that. So every time you do this exercise, it's not always starting off with the left leg crossed over the right leg. Tomorrow, you're going to start off with the right leg crossed over the left. Remember, the whole goal is balance and symmetry. So we don't want to always train and mobilize and stabilize the same side first. We're going to flip back and forth every time you do this. In the triangle position, widen your feet a little bit wider than shoulder width apart while still keeping the feet pointed straight ahead. So if you look down at your feet, the outer edge of your foot should be what's pointing forward. So why don't you slightly point the feet in a little bit? Perfect. From here, nice and slow, we're going to allow both knees to move to the ground to the left. And when they do this, your right pelvis is going to come up off the ground and the lower back's going to arch. Now, using both hips, bring your knees back up to the middle and now drop them down the opposite way to the floor to the right. Good. And using both hips again, come up to the middle. We're going to be doing this for about 2 to 3 minutes here. Back and forth, nice and slow. Now, notice how when your knees drop down to the right hip has to externally rotate, the left hip has to internally rotate, and your pelvis naturally moves to help this happen. This is your hip and pelvic rhythm that should exist naturally. And that's what this exercise does. We are trying to move and rotate the hips and reestablish that the pelvis should also rotate with that. If there is an imbalance in how either one of your hips or how your pelvis, or lower back for this matter, rotates, you're going to notice that your experience moving to the left is different than your experience rotating to the right. So take your time and really scout out how does it feel moving to the left versus how does it feel moving to the right. Range of motion is not important to me. What's important is that you find a comfortable way to do this. If you can, the direction that you're moving towards, that knee should be able to drop down to the ground, but only when we have really great hip function, so we don't need to force that. The hip that is internally rotating, so right now in this example, it's her right hip, that knee is never really going to go down to the ground. It's always going to have some space on it. So again, ground is not the objective. The objective is to resynchronize how the hips, pelvis, and spine move together. If you notice symptoms or discomfort moving to one side, then just stop just shy of before you feel those symptoms and treat the other side the same way. Meaning, if you've got symptoms moving to the left and you're limited moving to the left, but you can go to the right all the way down to the ground, I want both sides to match function. So if you can only go one way a couple inches, go the other way only a couple inches. And as we continue to do this exercise, make sure the feet aren't starting to creep and point outwards. So maybe on the next rep, bring your knees back up to the middle and just check to make sure that those feet are pointed straight. Great. And then begin the next rep. And the feet being straight ensures that we are not trying to rotate through the foot or the shin at all, which means rotation is only happening at the hip joint. And that's what we want, is for the hip, the pelvis, and the spine to rotate, not the shins and the feet to rotate with everything. Most people will find that if their hips, pelvis, and spine don't really rotate that well, that's why the foot starts pointing outwards, to help make up for the lack of movement happening up here. And because of the importance of this, that's why we're just going really slow, one rep at a time. Okay, that's about 3.5 minutes, which is pretty great for this exercise. If it feels good and you're getting great relief from this, please feel free to continue it. If not, let's move on to the next thing. Start off by bringing your feet closer together so your big toes and heels are touching. And from here, we're going to allow the knees to open up, so both knees drop down to the floor. And as both knees drop down to the floor, you're just going to kind of hinge onto the outer edge of the foot and then bring the knees back up together towards the middle. And we're going to do this for about the next 2 minutes or so, nice and slow, just like this. The whole goal with this exercise is to teach the hips how to rotate, and rotate in a really specific way. So notice how when your knees come together, the pelvis is still, and then when the knees open up, you should start to notice how the pelvis tips forward a little bit, the lower back maybe arches just a little, and then as the knees come back together, that tilt change is going to relax. We're using the hip, the position of the leg, to change the position of the pelvis and the spine really subtly with every single repetition. Friendly reminder to breathe on this one. We don't want the shoulders tense. We want the breathing to be nice, calm, and smooth as both hips learn how to rotate bilaterally, meaning at the same time, together. And notice how the feet come to a flat resting position after every single rep. We aren't trying to barrel through this and just get 100 of these done in the next 2 minutes. We're trying to sit with both hips and have that conversation to teach them that they should both be able to rotate and move at the same time, the same speed, with the same cadence. So what I want you to pay attention to is, does that happen? Do you feel like both hips can move together? Or is there more work in one hip over the other? Or maybe there's a little bit of a shaky feeling or a pinch or a pull. Just observe how imbalance or asymmetry are showing up for you today and watch how that starts to change over time. All right, we'll do one more, and that's 2 minutes. Great job. Starting off in a kneeling position, come up onto your knees. Both feet should be pointed straight back behind you, and the ankles should be in line with the knee width and your hip width. From here, curl your fingers into your knuckles with your arms down by your side. Gently pull the shoulder blades back together. Now raise your arms about to the side, keeping the shoulder blades back together. And let's start off doing gentle, slow, small arm circles forward. We're going to be doing these for a minute together forward. The biggest cue that I want you to pay attention to, aside from going slow and taking your time with each movement, is that the shoulder blades stay pinned back together the whole time. What we don't want is the shoulders to separate and you to throw your whole shoulder joint into this movement. When the shoulders are back, it ensures all of the proper stimulus and rotational movement stays in the head of the shoulder and is not transferred to any other part of the body or the shoulder girdle. So take your time, make sure to breathe, 1 rep at a time. Doing this in a kneeling position helps to take out any disparity that happens with how your feet or knees are functioning. So when we're kneeling, we kind of take the ankles and the knees out of the picture, and we crucially rely on the thighs, hips, and the pelvis to hold you upright, instead of maybe any dysfunction happening within the foot or the arch. Now from here, that was a minute. Flip your palms face up, keep the shoulders pinned back together, and let's start our slow reverse rotations. We've got 1 more minute of this. If there's not a lot of motion in the shoulder, you might find that you're trying to bend the elbow to help offshore the missing movement in the shoulder and directly transferring that to the elbow, or you might try to bend the wrist. I want you to straighten that arm, straighten your wrist, and ensure that all of that rotational movement really does happen at the head of that shoulder. Notice how her upper body is still. It's as if her arms are moving around her upper body instead of her upper body trying to move around her arms. It's completely different. Palms face up. Remember to breathe. And we're almost done. Nice and slow. Now, keeping your hand in the same position, bring the fingertips to the side of the head. Still looking forward, let's bring the elbows to touch right in front. It's okay if they don't touch, if they don't have that mobility yet, you'll get there. Just 1 nice, slow motion at a time. So far, with all those arm circles, we asked the shoulder to rotate. Now we're asking the shoulder to rotate and the shoulder blade to glide across your rib cage. So that first arm circle exercise set us up for actually being able to now reposition how that shoulder blade moves and glides with the other muscles in your mid-back. It's all about the sequence. If this is hard for you, just recognize that we're on a very basic level asking the muscles of the shoulder to move the bones. If your muscles are having a difficult time with this, it's a great way of understanding that the muscles are having a hard time moving the bones. So think of if a muscle can't really move the bone well, how much excessive stress and tension those muscles are going to experience just doing basic activities like getting the shoulder blade to move. So training these motions and making them easier will significantly help improve how your shoulders and neck feel all day long. Great, that's time. So starting off, standing about a good foot away from the wall, your leg furthest away from the wall is going to take a step forward. Notice how we're not heel to toe. We've got about a half to a full foot step in between both feet. Take a moment to shift your body weight forward, then maybe kind of lean it backward. I want you to get a sense of you feeling like your weight is evenly distributed between both feet. Once you're sure-footed and the weight is evenly distributed, tighten up the quads, the front thigh muscles, and both kneecaps are going to point straight, as they probably are if the feet are straight. We're going to keep the quads engaged the entire time and the knees pointed straight the entire time as well. From here, take your hands and place them on your pelvis. Keeping your quads tight and your knees pointed straight, rotate the pelvis as much as you can towards the wall. Once you're rotated as far as you can, then place the hands on the wall about chest height. Good. So let's place the hands right about here and lower. Good. Just like this. Quads are still tight. Rotate the upper body to the wall. And then look over your left shoulder, and we're going to stay here for about 1.5 minutes. Keep the weight equal on both feet. Ensure the front quads are tight. We're not elevating one shoulder just to rotate, so get a sense of that shoulder position to keep them both level. When we're in this position, your knees are pointed forwards, your legs are pointed forwards, your hips are pointed forwards. But as your pelvis rotates towards the wall, this front hip is having to externally rotate. The back hip is having to internally rotate. You are basically wringing out any dysfunction or imbalance when it comes to either hip's ability to rotate. Pay attention to how this side feels, as we're going to then go into the other side and compare how the other side feels. Let's point that front foot in just a little bit further. Good. We want to keep that foot as straight as possible. Keep breathing. You should feel a significant level of muscle activation from the hips below. And let's slowly come out of this the same way we got into it. So come back to our start position, and let's go ahead and turn around, face the opposite direction. Now, the setup, I'm going to give you the same cues. So starting with both feet pointing forwards, now you're going to step the leg that's furthest away from the wall out in front. Both legs are in line. Take a second here to just get a sense of equal weight loading and distribution. Once you've got a sense of that, tighten both quads. Both knees are going to point forwards. Hands on your pelvis. And we're starting off with the pelvis first because I don't want you to use your shoulders and then crank on your pelvis. I want you to drive the rotation with your pelvis first as far as you can towards the wall. Then place the hands on the wall about chest height, and then look over your right shoulder. Let's get this back heel a little bit more towards the wall so both feet are straight. Great. And you're going to notice if you have a hip imbalance that rotating one way is probably a lot easier than rotating the other way. Why this is a really great exercise to put into your daily practice, especially if you feel a difference, if it's easier for you to rotate one way and harder for you to rotate the other way, well, think of how that is going to show up when you're just standing. Your body, if rotation is different, is probably going to rotate in the path of least resistance. So this might send one shoulder, one hip, and one pelvis in an entirely different position than the other side because your body is more comfortable pointing clockwise than it is pointing counterclockwise, or maybe vice versa. So take a couple deep breaths here. Let your body rotate both ways. Today we started rotating to the left and finished to the right. Tomorrow you're going to alternate that and start rotating to the right and then finish with your left. Sure to keep those front thighs tight and relax. Great job. Moving to your hands and knees, let's start off in a tabletop position. Right now, the shoulders are directly above the wrists and the hips are directly above the knees. From here, we're going to move our pelvis first. So why don't we start rolling our pelvis backwards? Good, just like that. And the upper body is going to follow that motion. Now, keeping your upper body still, let's begin to move the pelvis first. So gently start tipping that pelvis forward. And one at a time, I want you to feel your vertebrae, your backbones, slowly move to the floor as your shoulders come back and you look forward. And this is the important part. Keep your upper body still and now begin to move your pelvis again. And slowly allow that change to go all the way up through the mid-back, the shoulders, and the head. I want you to think of this as a wave of motion, and your pelvis is moving everything. We're going to be doing this for about a minute to a minute and a half. We're not looking to go fast. We're looking to have the pelvis control the position of the spine instead of letting the upper body move the pelvis like you might be used to. And every time you slowly go into this pelvic mobilizing movement, I want you to see if you can really connect to both sides of your body doing this together simultaneously. Some of you might find you can only feel muscles on one side of the body doing all this motion, and that's okay. That'll change over time. And one last important cue on this is to make sure you stay in that tabletop position. At no point do we want to lean forward or lean backwards just for the sake of getting a better range of motion. I don't care how much arch you can get. I don't care how much bending and rounding you can get. The goal is not max end range of motion. The goal is that your pelvis can start to move your spine again, instead of the spine always having to move the pelvis because the hip flexors and the glutes have basically shut down. Keep breathing and keep moving. You can do as many of these as you want, but that's time for this. Let's go ahead and move on. Starting off in a tabletop position, let's bring your right foot forward so it's in line with your hands. Now, let's bring your left knee to the back of the right heel. We're going to set up the stretch this way to make sure that we stretch both sides the same way. Let's begin to tuck your back foot into the ground, keeping your hands on the ground. Let's straighten both legs. Now, it's okay if you're going to need to spend some time working into a straight leg position. What we want to do is make sure that we're not just tugging and pulling on muscles. I want you to find the front of your thighs, so engage your quads as well as you can. And when your quads are then engaged, I want you to relax everything up top. So relax your neck. I want you to feel like your upper body is just hanging from your pelvis as your legs experience this much demand and stimulus. It might feel really natural for you to try to hunker down and hold yourself up with your shoulders. Keep the pressure light on your hands. I want your legs supporting you under this much load and tension with this much length to them. This is a crossroad between mobility and strength, so let's make sure we put the work in the legs when we can. And why don't you give your feet a check? Let's make sure both feet are pointed forwards. Now, ideally, this is not going to feel like a stretch because we are asking the muscles behind our body to go through their natural range of motion. But not a lot of us have that ideal function yet. So experience the stretch for what it is and notice how it gets significantly easier and less of a stretch over time and just becomes a normal position of function for you. Great, let's go ahead and come out of that. And again, we're gonna have the same exact setup. So now your left foot goes in front, in line with your hands. Bring your right knee to the back of your front left heel and tuck your right toes into the ground. Now, when you're ready, let's go ahead and straighten both legs. Stand up, great. And you should probably already have a pulse on how this side feels in comparison to the other. Was it easier? Was it tighter? Is it in the same place that you felt the other, just more significant or less? Not that you need to do anything with that information. Just take a couple deep breaths. Recognize how imbalance and asymmetry has shown up in your body, and let's start to work on balancing that out over time. Keep the upper body as loose and soft as possible. You might try to bring strength of the shoulders into this to protect the legs from feeling this level of stimulus. If it feels okay, maybe ease the pressure of your hands, soften the upper body, and let your legs go through the function they need. If we can take a couple deep breaths here It's going to start to help to activate that parasympathetic nervous system and give you a little bit more of a deeper release. And that's time. Great job. Let's start this exercise on our hands and our knees, so a really great tabletop position. And the tabletop position is going to help set up the spacing for the rest of this exercise. So let's scoot the hips back a little bit so the hips are right over the knees. So just kind of shift your body weight back, good. And let's make sure the wrists are right below the shoulders on this. Perfect. From here, let's tuck the toes into the ground. And instead of using your shoulders and pushing your hips up, I want you to feel like your hips are driving you upwards. So feel the quads work, the hips and the pelvis go up. And from here, feel like you're using your hips to pull you back and up, and your upper body just goes along for that ride. And we're gonna stay here for a good minute. Now, over time, you're gonna notice that your feet and heels will go flat. It's okay if they're not down to the ground today. I think that just shows the area of opportunity that we're gonna make on all of those muscles on the backside of your body. So with whatever level of comfort you have, gently see if we can just allow those heels to sink closer towards the ground. Take a couple deep breaths. This is one of my favorite corrective exercises to do when cued in this way, because it gets the hips and the shoulders to work together. And if we can learn how to breathe and stay calm and not bring a lot of tension or stress to this, but remain strong and soft at the same time, we're going to get and prime our nervous system to do some pretty incredible things. All right, good. That's time. That was a minute. You can always stay here longer if you want. This next exercise, I want you to find something that you can hold on to, as it's not a balance exercise. The more firm the object you can hold on to, the more you're going to get something out of this. When you think about an ankle raise to strengthen the calf and the arch muscles, how most people approach it is by shifting the pelvis forward, and this anterior shift helps to lift the heel, but it's more of momentum lifting the heel than it is actually the strength of the arch and the calf. So we're going to hold on to something to give us a sense of balance. And from here, the whole point is to keep the pelvis vertical over the ankle. So starting off with both feet pointing forwards, without shifting my body forward, I'm going to come right up onto the balls of the feet and then come back down. I'm not using a jerky, jolty motion at all. It's nice and smooth. However fast I go up is exactly how fast I'm coming down. We don't want to take advantage of any elastic properties and start bouncing up and down. We want to keep the work really slow and focused so the soft tissue is doing the majority of the work. And we're not relying on potentially the tendons or the elastic effect helping to get us up or down. All right, now let's point our feet outward at about 45 degrees. And you should notice that the knee points with the foot, so the hip is now externally rotated. And we are going to get our calves and arch to work with an externally rotated hip on both sides. Again, nice and slow, not shifting the pelvis forward or sticking the butt back. This is about keeping everything vertically stacked. And the more vertically stacked your weight is, the harder your calves have to work, because they have to lift your entire mass upward instead of upward and forward or upward and backward. So take your time with these and feel the strength come back to the arches in the calf. Now we're going to do the opposite. We're going to go pigeon-toed. So big toes touching, heels kicked out to the side. Now I've got an internally rotated hip position, and same thing. It's important that we get the calves and the arches to work with a straight foot, externally rotated foot, and an internally rotated foot, because this ensures that the arch can work and the calf can work in all 3 different hip positions, which show up in the vast majority of movements. Even something like walking, our hips are continually changing positions by rotating in and out. And keeping the calf strong, regardless of the hip position, helps to ensure the best level of stability and function when walking or running. Now, we just did 1 set together. Feel free to do 1 to 2 more rounds after this until you really feel like the calves are working to your desired level of intensity.